Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do one of my favorite videos to do every year. It's January and it's just fun at this time of year to look ahead to the books that will be coming throughout the year and do a video about my most anticipated books of the year. I love doing this so much that I usually do a mid-year check-in to see about anticipated books coming in the latter part of the year. I'll link my two most recent ones of those down below, the one for the latter part of 2023 and the one that I did in January of 2023, just in case you want to take a stroll down memory lane. It'll be in the description box down below, along with affiliate links to bookshop.org for all of the titles that I'm going to talk about in this video. If you use those affiliate links, it would, help me out, but you don't have to use them. I would just encourage you to pre-order any of these books that sound interesting to you, because it really does help not just the author, but it helps the publisher and it helps the bookstores, because it just lets people know what books people are interested in and how many they might need and all of that good stuff. So pre-order, pre-order, pre-order. Again, the affiliate links for bookshop.org will be down below, or you can contact your local independent bookstore. I'm wearing a sweatshirt from Raven Bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas today because it's really cold where I live. So this sweatshirt is saving my life right now. You can also contact your local library. If they are not going to be getting a copy of this book, you can always recommend that they purchase a copy of it as well. And that supports your library, which is a good thing to do anyway. We are going to go through these books chronologically in the order in which they will be published. So obviously that means we will start with January and work our way further out into the year. I don't believe we go any further than June. So that video that will be coming in like June or July with the latter part is going to reveal a lot about what's coming later in the year. Obviously, release dates are subject to change, so just be warned about that. But let's dive in and get going. I actually have 3 of the books here in advanced reader copy form. The publisher was kind enough to send them to me. And the first is How We Named the Stars by Andres N. Ordorica. This is going to be published by Tin House on January 30th. When I saw this, I immediately reached out to Tin House. They have become one of my favorite smaller or independent publishers in recent years. They published My Beloved Night of the Living Rez by Morgan Talty, which will be coming up later on in the video, as you can probably imagine. So I have been keeping a close eye on anything that they are releasing, and this immediately jumped out to me as something that I am going to be interested in. It is a queer story about a man named Daniel de la Luna who arrives as a scholarship student at an elite East Coast university. And while he is there, his roommate Sam changes a lot of his perspective. Their relationship sort of evolves from there. It becomes sort of intimate. And then here's a little bit of what it says on bookshop.org about it to give you an idea of what it's about. As he grapples with profound loss, Daniel finds himself in his family's ancestral homeland in Mexico for the summer, finding joy in this setting even as he struggles to come to terms with what's happened and faces a host of new questions. How does the person he is connect with this place his family comes from? How is his own story connected to his late uncle's, and how might he reconcile the many parts of himself as he learns to move forward? Equal parts tender and triumphant, Andres N. Ordorica's How We Named the Stars is a debut novel of love, heartache, redemption, and learning to honor the dead. A story of finding the strength to figure out who you are and who you could be if only the world would let you. Pretty much everything about that sounds really interesting to me. And I think if you follow along with my channel, you probably could identify all the little beats in that description. It's sort of like a generational family story. I mean, check. It's a queer story. Check. It's about grappling with your own identity and figuring out who you are or who you want to be. I mean, check. There's so much about this book that sounds really interesting to me. So I need to get a wiggle on and try to read this before it is released, because again, the release date is January 30th, but I am so excited to have a copy of this book. Thank you to Tin House Press. And I am so excited to read it and share my thoughts about it once I do. The next book that I want to talk about is also coming out on January 30th, and it's a bit of a lighter book because you need light books. You know, you can be a little bit serious and you can be a little bit silly and have some fun and enjoy a little cinnamon bun action. So it's Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame by Olivia Ford. Again, this is coming out on January 30th, and the publisher is Pamela Dorman Books. So this is sort of like a lighthearted Bake Off-esque story, so you can sort of imagine that immediately made my ears perk up. Here's what it says. A huge-hearted, redemptive coming-of-old-age tale, a love story, and an ode to good food. Nothing could be more out of character, but after 59 years of marriage, as her husband Bernard's health declines and her friends' lives become focused on their grandchildren, which Jenny never had, Jenny decides she wants a little something for herself. So she secretly applies to be a contestant on the primetime TV show Britain Bakes. I mean, obviously, it's a Great British Baking Show stand-in, which I love. Whisked into an unfamiliar world of cameras and timed challenges, Jenny delights in a newfound independence. But that independence and the stress of the competition starts to unearth memories buried decades ago. Chocolate tea cakes remind her of a furtive errand involving a wedding ring. Sugared donuts call up a stranger's kind act. A simple cottage loaf brings back the moment her life changed forever. With her baking star rising, Jenny struggles to keep a lid on that first secret, a long-concealed deceit that threatens to shatter the very foundations of her marriage. It's the only time in 6 decades that she's kept something from Bernard. By putting herself in the limelight, has Jenny created a recipe for disaster. So it's obviously lighthearted. It involves a little bit of a bake-off tie-in, which just grabs my attention. But the idea of food being tied to memory and place is also something that I really appreciate and find interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how this book works, because I'm really looking forward to reading it. You need light books to balance out the series, and I think this will definitely do wonders for me. Then we start moving into February with Float Up, Sing Down by Laird Hunt. So if you follow along, you know that I'm a huge fan of the book Zorrie, which is faced out on my bookshelf right here. I had also read another book of Laird Hunt's called In the House in the Dark of the Woods, something like that, which is a very different book tonally. That was what I knew Laird Hunt as, because it's how I first met his writing. And it turns out most of his writing is actually like Zorrie, which honestly I would have made a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize the year it was released. It's that good. So I was really excited when I found out that he has this new book coming out from Bloomsbury. And I was even more excited when I found out that it has a connection to Zorrie. I believe Zorrie herself sort of turns up in this book. And I did not know this either, but an earlier book of Laird Hunt's has characters that were in Zorrie, so it feels like he's creating a universe of books in the world of Zorrie, even before Zorrie herself emerged as a character, and I just find that absolutely fascinating and delightful. Here is what it says. Float Up, Sing Down is the story of a single day, but in that day, how much teeming life. The residents of this rural town have their routines, their preferences, their joys, grudges, and regrets. Gossip is paramount, lives are entwined. Each of the 14 stories of Float Up, Sing Down follows one character's day in the life of one of Hunt's most beloved and enduring landscapes. In the tradition of Willa Cather, Sherwood Anderson, Elizabeth Strout, and Edward P. Jones, this is a symphony of souls, a masterful portrait of both loneliness and community by one of our great limners of American experience. I'm so excited to read this book. And again, I really got to get a wiggle on here because my reading has started very slowly in 2024. And this book, the Mrs. Quinn book, and this are coming really soon. And I want to try to get to them around their release date. So I really have to start hurrying in order to make that happen. The final book that I actually have here to hold up is Greta and Valden by Rebecca K. Riley. This is published by Avid Reader Press on February 6th, the same day as Float Up, Sing Down. So you can see how I have like a backlog of books to get to in 2024 already. But what an exciting problem to have, right? One of the things that immediately appealed to me when I first saw this book posted online is that it was sort of compared to the movie The Royal Tenenbaums, or like for fans of the movie The Royal Tenenbaums, and I am a huge fan of the movie The Royal Tenenbaums. Even though I have a very mixed response to Wes Anderson's other movies, The Royal Tenenbaums I absolutely adore. Here's what it says online. It's been a year since his ex-boyfriend dumped him and moved from Auckland to Buenos Aires, and Valden is doing fine. He has a good flat with his sister Greta, a good career where his colleagues only occasionally remind him that he is the sole Maori person in the office, and a good friend who he only sleeps with when he's sad. But when work sends him to Argentina and he's thrown back in his former lover's orbit, Valden is forced to confront the feelings he's been trying to ignore and the future he wants. Greta is not letting her painfully unrequited crush or her possibly pointless master's thesis or her pathetic academic salary get her down. She would love to focus on the charming fellow grad students she meets at a party and her friendships with a circle of similarly floundering 20-somethings, but her chaotic family life won't stop intruding. Her mother is keeping secrets, her nephew is having a gay crisis, and her brother has suddenly flown to South America without a word. Sharp, hilarious, and with an undeniable emotional momentum that builds to an exuberant conclusion, Greta and Valden careens us through the siblings' misadventures and the messy dramas of their sprawling, eccentric, Maori, Russian, Catalonian family. An acclaimed bestseller in New Zealand, Greta and Valden is fresh, joyful, and alive with the possibility of love in its many mystifying forms. All of that sounds really interesting to me. Again, I love that it seems to have a really great sense of humor. People have commented on, I did a book haul where I first talked about this, and people who have already read this because it was published in New Zealand where it is obviously a bestseller, and people were so excited that more people were going to get to read this book because it is being published in the United States, and that got me even more excited for this book, so I can't wait to read it. But again, I really need to get a wiggle on with my reading in 2024 because I'm already behind. It's only January 10th as I'm filming this, and I'm already behind. But I'm not going to allow myself to stress about it. Now let's talk about Neighbors and Other Stories by Diane Oliver. This is going to be published on February 13th of this year by Grove Press. I actually have access to this on NetGalley, which is another thing I need to try to cram in. I have a couple of books on NetGalley that I need to get to, and this is one that's really like burning a hole in my brain. I really want to get to it. It sounds absolutely fascinating. So it's described as a debut, but Diane Oliver actually died in 1966 at the age of 22. So I believe these stories had been published, just not together. So basically, this is someone appreciating the legacy that Diane Oliver left behind and pulling the stories together. And technically, it is a debut because there just hasn't been a book of her work before. And from this description, I was really fascinated, and I think you might be too. Here we go. A bold and haunting debut story collection that follows various characters as they navigate the day-to-day perils of Jim Crow racism, from Diane Oliver, a missing figure in the canon of 20th century African-American literature. A remarkable talent far ahead of her time, Diane Oliver died in 1966 at the age of 22, leaving behind these crisply told and often chilling tales that explore race and racism in 1950s and 60s America. In this first and only collection by a masterful storyteller, finally taking her rightful place in the canon, Oliver's insightful stories reverberate into the present day. I won't get into the description of the stories themselves. I will just jump to the end and say these are incisive and intimate portraits of African-American families in everyday moments of anxiety and crisis that look at how they use agency to navigate their predicaments. As much a social and historical document as it is a taut, engrossing collection, Neighbors is an exceptional literary feat from a crucial, once-lost figure of letters. I mean, I immediately looked on NetGalley to see if it was available, and when it was, I hit request, and I was so excited when I was given access to it. So excited. So I can't wait to read that collection. Next is one of the books that I'm just a little bit unsure of. It's Ours by Philip B. Williams. I mean, it sounds fascinating. Being honest, and a little bit shallow, because, you know, you do judge a book by a cover. The cover is the first thing that immediately jumped out to me about this book. When I saw this, I immediately had to look at it. You know, I feel like we've been in a bit of a rut with book covers lately. They tend to look a lot alike. There are those sort of, I'm trying to think of an example, or if I have an example on hand, and I don't. The colorful little splashes of color that you've seen, or just a lot of beige. So this feels like a bomb. More of this, please, publishing industry. This cover is flawless, and it immediately caught my attention. So let's talk about what this book is about. And by the way, it is coming on February 20th, and it will be published by Viking. An epic novel set in mid-19th century America about the spiritual costs of a freedom that demands fierce protection. In this ingenious, sweeping novel, Philip B. Williams introduces us to an enigmatic woman named Saint, a fearsome conjurer who in the 1830s annihilates plantations all over Arkansas to rescue the people enslaved there. She brings those she has freed to a haven of her own creation, a town just north of St. Louis, magically concealed from outsiders, named Ars. It is in this miraculous place that Saint's grand experiment, a truly secluded community where her people may flourish, takes root. But although Saint does her best to protect the inhabitants of Ars, over time her conjuring and memories begin to betray her, leaving the town vulnerable to intrusions by newcomers with powers of their own. As the cracks in Saint's creation are exposed, some begin to wonder whether the community's safety might be yet another form of bondage. Set over the course of 4 decades and steeped in a rich tradition of American literature informed by Black surrealism, mythology, and spirituality, Ars is a stunning exploration of the possibilities and limitations of love and freedom by a writer of capacious vision and talent. So much about that sounds really interesting to me. It's the magical elements that make me a little bit hesitant and make me think I might potentially want to hold off until closer to the book's release date so I can hear some feedback from other people. The reviews have been excellent so far. I am only concerned about that magical element. And I love the fact that it is informed by Black surrealism, mythology, and spirituality. That part is great. I just, as a reader, tend not to gravitate toward things that involve kind of literal magic. So it makes me a little nervous. But I do really love everything that magic is in service of. So maybe I'll just get over myself and pre-order a copy of this and not wait until closer to the release date, because it honestly sounds fascinating. And again, I adore this cover design. So good. So good. So good. Really, I'm not kidding. I would love to see more of that. Next, we get to Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, which is going to be published on February 27th, 2024 from Knopf. Now, you've probably guessed why Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. I didn't even know anything about the book at first. It was the author who made me add this to my most anticipated list because of There There, which was Tommy Orange's debut. It's a linked story collection. It was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. It is a really great book if you have not read it, and it's also very smart. So that is what really got me interested in Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. Here is the description of the book. Star, a young survivor of the Sand Creek Massacre, is brought to the Fort Marion prison castle, where he is forced to learn English and practice Christianity. By Richard Henry Pratt, an evangelical prison guard who will go on to found the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, an institution dedicated to the eradication of Native history, culture, and identity. A generation later, Star's son Charles is sent to the school, where he is brutalized by the man who was once his father's jailer. Under Pratt's harsh treatment, Charles clings to moments he shares with a young fellow student, Opal Viola, as the two envision a future away from the institutional violence that follows their bloodlines. Then Oakland, 2018. Opal Viola Victoria Bearshield is barely holding her family together after the shooting that nearly took the life of her nephew, Orville, which sounds like it has ties to There. From the moment he awakens in a hospital bed, Orville begins compulsively Googling school shootings on YouTube. He also becomes emotionally reliant on the prescription medications meant to ease his physical trauma. His younger brother, Loney, suffering from PTSD, is struggling to make sense of the carnage he witnessed at the shooting by secretly cutting himself and enacting blood rituals that he hopes will connect him to his Cheyenne heritage. Opal is equally adrift. All sounds really interesting. I think there have been a couple of books about the Indian schools lately and the carnage that they've wrought and the psychological damage and the generational trauma that has come from them. I would recommend A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. Really great book. And there have also been books about the theft of Native or Indigenous culture as colonial forces came in and took that from them. Check out The Yield by Tara June Winge. That's about Australia, but it could easily apply to history here in the United States. And I love the fact that it connects back to There, or at least seems to. So I'm really looking forward to this book. Now we get to another one that I sort of have a question mark about. The American Daughters by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. This will be released on February 27th, and it is published by One World. I haven't read any of Maurice Carlos Ruffin's books. I heard good things about We Cast a Shadow, but I just never got around to reading it, and I don't own a copy of it. But he has been on my radar, and this sounds like it could be really interesting. 80. A curious, sharp-witted girl and her fierce mother, Sanet, are inseparable. Enslaved to a businessman in the French Quarter of New Orleans, the pair spend their days dreaming of a loving future and reminiscing about their family's rebellious and storied history. When mother and daughter are separated, 80 is left hopeless and directionless until she stumbles into the Mockingbird Inn and meets Leonore, a free black woman with whom she becomes fast friends. Lenore invites 80 to join a clandestine society of spies called the Daughters. With the courage instilled in her by Sanete, and with help from these strong women, 80 learns how to put herself first. So begins her journey toward liberation and imagining a new future. So that doesn't quite get into it, but the reviews I've seen from like Kirkus and Publishers Weekly get into the fact that it is basically about women sort of going on the offensive to fight slavery and becoming like spies, and that sounds fascinating. It could also be a bit of a misfire. So I think that's where I'm a little bit torn, and I might wait a little closer to the release date to start hearing feedback from people. But in the meantime, I have to admit, I am super intrigued by that premise. The cover is pretty stunning as well. It just seems kind of fun. So, I might break down and see if a copy is available or pre-order something, because it just sounds really interesting. And it actually has a blurb from Robert Jones Jr., who wrote The Prophets, which is a book that I really loved in recent years. So there's that for sure. Now we have another one that I'm a little bit unsure of. It's Change by Edouard Louis, translated by John Lambert. This is coming out on March 5th and will be published by FSG. The reason I'm a little unsure is that I've read one book of Edouard Louis. It was The End of Eddie. And his books are very autofictional and brutal, like bleak and sort of painful to read. And even though The End of Eddie is short, it's difficult to get through. And I've always felt a little removed from. Part of me is curious to read more by Edouard Louis. Part of me feels like never again. But this sounds interesting. So here's the description. Edouard Louis longs for a life beyond the poverty, discrimination, and violence in his working-class hometown, so he sets out for school in Amiens and later university in Paris. He sheds the provincial Eddie for an elegant new name, determined to eradicate every aspect of his past. He reads incessantly, he dines with aristocrats, he spends nights with millionaires and drug dealers. Everything he does is motivated by a single obsession: to become someone else. At once harrowing and profound, Change is not just a personal odyssey, a story of dreams and of the beautiful violence of being torn away, but a profound portrait of a society divided by class, power, and inequality. So, could be more of the same, I don't know. If there's a little more hope in this one, I might be able to get into it. I think that's where this is one that I would definitely wait closer to the release date to hear a little bit of feedback from other people before I commit to it. But it does sound really interesting. And because it is a very queer story, and because it is so innately, intensely personal, there is always interest on my part. Part of me wonders if I can subject myself to that kind of an experience again. We shall see. Now, we have one of the biggest books that's going to be coming out in 2024, James by Percival Everett. An immediate and instant frontrunner in my mind for the Pulitzer Prize for 2025. This will be released on March 19th, 2024, and it will be published by Doubleday Books. I believe this is the first book that is going to be published by Doubleday of Percival Everett's. He switched publishers at some point in the recent past. So, you know why I'm interested in Percival Everett. The Trees, which I still have not read, and I really, 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 really need to. I've heard so many really good things about this. It was a finalist for the Booker Prize, and Telephone, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and this really seems to have been the turning point in Percival Everett's career. Once he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, his next book just soared into the stratosphere. His book Erasure has just been adapted into the movie American Fiction, which I really want to see. So he is like everywhere. And his last book, Dr. No, was a little out there. People still loved it. It sounded really interesting, but it was a little out there, so it couldn't really be seen as a contender for the Pulitzer Prize. But this, oh wow. If this lands, it could be a slam dunk. It could be a slam dunk. We'll have to see. So I'm not going to read the description of it, but basically it takes the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which has the character of Jim, and centers him in a new narrative. It's basically the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim. And it apparently, from advance buzz and reviews that I've heard, puts some twists and plays on what you might expect. I need to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn before I get to this. And actually, I had requested this on NetGalley so long ago that I assumed that I had been rejected for this book. But just a couple of days ago, I got an email that it was accepted. So I suddenly have access to this book, and I almost passed out from excitement. I can't wait to read this, but I have to read Huckleberry Finn first. So I have until March 19th, maybe February, that'll be a good project for me. Read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and read James by Percival Everett. I am so looking forward to this book, and I think a lot of other people are. I do have a bit of a question mark around American Spirits by Russell Banks, which will be published on March 5th by Knopf as well. Russell Banks died in 2023, so this is a posthumous novel. He has been in the mix for the Pulitzer Prize, but not in a long time. Part of me wonders if, given that this is a posthumous book, he could be in the mix again. It's just been such a long time since he was, but he is still a very respected and well-regarded writer, even though he died about a year ago at this point. And I've never read one of his books, so part of me would just really like to do that. And this one does sound interesting. Here is the blurb. From one of America's most celebrated storytellers come three dark, interlocking tales about the residents of a rural New York town and the shocking headlines that become their local mythologies. A husband sells property to a mysterious temperamental stranger and is hounded on social media when he publicly questions the man's character. A couple grows concerned when an enigmatic family moves next door and the children start sneaking over to beg for help. Two dangerous criminals kidnap an elderly couple and begin blackmailing their grandson, demanding that he pay back what he owes. Suspenseful, thrilling, and expertly crafted, American Spirits explores the hostile undercurrents of our communities and American politics at large, as well as the ways local tragedies can be both devastating and somehow everyday. Ushering the readers through the town of Sam Dent, Russell Banks has etched yet another brilliant entry into the bedrock of American fiction. So, especially given that this is a posthumous book, it'll be interesting to see how it lands and what happens with it. I haven't read one of his books. I feel like if I were going to read one, I should almost go back and read some of his big ones like Continental Drift or some of the others. However, this sounds like a really interesting entry point, the way it sort of plays with tropes of mysteries and thrillers to tell a story about America. Could be really, really, really fascinating. By the way, I should mention that my dog Teddy has fallen asleep on the floor behind me, so if you do hear a dog snoring, that's what it is. It's happening in the video. Now we have Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. This will be published on April 2nd, and the publisher is Atria Books. This is another one that I had requested a long time ago on NetGalley, and I just got a message about a week ago that I was given access to it, and I was so excited about it. Not to the point of almost passing out, like I was with Percival Everett, but pretty close. I have really enjoyed Alison Cochrane's books. She wrote The Charm Offensive, which is a really fun queer romance, and she wrote Kiss Her Once for Me, which is another super fun queer romance. I really loved both of them and the ways they discuss mental health and the strong relationship dynamics and the connections between the protagonists of both. I love both of them, so I can't wait to read this one. So this one is sort of like a road book. A long time ago, Logan Miletus and Rosemary Hale used to be friends. They spent their childhood summers running through the woods, rebelling against their conservative small town and dreaming of escaping. But then an incident the summer before high school turned them into bitter rivals. After graduation, they went 10 years without speaking. Now in their 30s, Logan and Rosemary find they aren't quite living the lives of adventure they had imagined for themselves. Still in their small town and working as teachers at their alma mater, they're both stuck in old patterns. Uptight Rosemary chooses security and stability over all else, working constantly, and her most stable relationship is with her label maker. Chaotic and impulsive Logan has a long list of misguided ex-lovers and an apathetic shrug she uses to protect herself from anything real. And as hard as they try to avoid each other and their complicated past, they keep crashing into each other, including with their cars. But when their beloved former English teacher and lifelong mentor tells them he has only a few months to live, they're forced together once and for all to fulfill his last wish, a cross-country road trip. Stuffed into the gayest van west of the Mississippi, the three embark on a life-changing summer trip from Washington State to the Grand Canyon, from the Gulf Coast to coastal Maine, that will chart a new future and perhaps lead them back to one another. My heart is ready. That's all I have to say. I am ready and can't wait to read this book. And the exact same thing is true of the sequel to one of my favorite books from 2023, The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. I'll link my favorite books of 2023 down below if you'd like to hear me talk about how great this book is. And don't judge me. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. So, The Guncle Abroad by Stephen Rowley will be released on May 21st, and it is going to be published by G.P. Putnam's Sons. So basically, I'm not going to get too far into the premise of The Guncle is that you have this man, Patrick, the one wearing the muumuu and drinking a martini. He was on a hit TV show, and it sounds sort of like Friends, but isn't Friends. The show has been off the air. He has sort of isolated himself in Palm Springs and is living a sort of quiet life by himself. And his best friend, who had married his brother, passes away of cancer. And he finds out that while his best friend and sister-in-law was in the process of dying, his brother had gotten hooked on painkillers. So he needs to go to rehab. And he asks Patrick if he will take his two children. So basically, Patrick is experiencing this key moment of grief for the two kids. He is not someone who has been a parental figure for anyone. And the relationship between them is adorable. They navigate grief together. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. And in this one, you can probably guess, they go abroad. They go to Europe. I believe the brother is getting remarried. So Patrick goes to Europe with the two kids, who are now a little bit older. And I'm a little skeptical. I will admit, part of me is a little bit skeptical that there's a sequel to this. However, I trust Stephen Rowley. And again, my heart is ready for this. I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. The final book I have to talk about for you today ties back to Night of the Living Rez by Morgan Talty, again, from Tin House. I love this book. I love this book so much. It's Fire Exit, a novel coming from Morgan Talty. So this is a collection of linked stories. It's absolutely brilliant. If you have not read Night of the Living Rez, do yourself a favor and read it before June 4th, which is when Fire Exit is going to be coming out. And it is also going to be published by Tin House. If you're looking for smaller or independent publishers, Tin House has a very interesting catalog, so I would recommend that you check them out. I've been kind of trying not to know a lot about Fire Exit, being honest, because I'm in so hard thanks to the Night of the Living Rez. So I actually have not read any description of it. Let's go on a journey. I'll read the description to you, and I'll be getting it for the very first time. From the porch of his home, Charles Lamisway has watched the life he might have had unfold across the river on Maine's Penobscot Reservation. On the far bank, he caught brief moments of Roger and Mary raising their only child, Elizabeth, from the day she came home from the hospital to her early 20s. But there's always been something deeper and more dangerous than the river that divides him from this family and the rest of the tribal community. It's the secret that Elizabeth is his daughter, a secret Charles is no longer willing to keep. Drama. Now it's been weeks since he's seen Elizabeth, and Charles is worried as he attempts to hold on and care for what he can, his home and property, his alcoholic, quick-tempered, and big-hearted friend Bobby, and his mother Louise, who is slipping ever deeper into dementia. He becomes increasingly haunted by his past, forced to confront a lost childhood on the reservation, a love affair cut short, and the death of his beloved stepfather, Frederick, in a hunting accident, a death that he and Louise cannot agree where to lay the blame. Charles contends with questions he's long been afraid to ask. Is it his secret to share? And would his daughter want to know the truth? I love that it ties back to the Penobscot Reservation. It's not surprising. That's where the linked stories in Night of the Living Res are set. Morgan Talty does beautiful things with those stories. So, this could be melodramatic, could be a little crazy, like TV movie of the week style. I don't think so. I think the care, thought, and the sense of humor that was displayed in Night of the Living Res will probably carry into this one, and I'm still so in. And I'm kind of here for all of that drama. So I'm really looking forward to this book. So those are the books that I am most anticipating in 2024. Is there a book that you're looking forward to that I didn't mention here? Please mention it in the comment section down below, and let's create a resource. Make a list of books that other people can check out in addition to the ones that I talked about. If you have thoughts about any of the books that I've talked about or the authors or anything like that, please leave that in the comment section down below as well. As always, I really appreciate your time. Let's get going. It's 2024. I'm really excited for this, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.